This stress is killing me. Ever heard somebody say that? Maybe somebody that looks a lot like you. Well, whoever said that may be exactly right. Stress does kill much more than most people realize. The medical community is beginning to comprehend just how damaging stress is on our bodies. We tend to think of stress as only a problem emotionally or mentally or maybe even spiritually, but physically, the effects of stress on our bodies is devastating. Many studies, seminars, and books are trying to tell us how best to deal with this subtle killer of stress. Now, over the next several weeks, although we're going to take time out for Mother's Day next week and Father's Day next month, so we'll have a couple of breaks, but through the next several weeks, I'd like to consider this matter of stress from a biblical perspective. Like a medical doctor, I want to consider the symptoms, the diagnosis, a prognosis, and a prescription for how we can deal with various things that stress us out and threaten us on many different levels. If it's not properly handled, these things will adversely affect our health. I'm entitling this message, Stress Fractures, because they often go unnoticed and untreated until they become bigger problems. Now, in all fairness, I'm kind of stealing the title from a book by Chuck Swindoll called Stress Fractures. Sometimes you just can't reinvent the wheel, and it's stated better than anything I could come up with. And I will be using his book somewhat. I take a little different approach, but there are many things in common. But this idea of stress fractures, maybe you've heard of it. In the physical realm, the Mayo Clinic defines stress fractures as tiny cracks in a bone. And it goes on to add, stress fractures are caused by the repetitive application of force, often by overuse, such as repeatedly jumping up and down or running long distances. Stress fractures can also arise from normal use of a bone that's been weakened by a condition such as osteoporosis. Stress fractures are most common in the weight-bearing bones of the lower leg and the foot. Track and field athletes are particularly susceptible to stress fractures, but really anyone can experience one. If you're starting a new exercise program, for example, you may be at risk if you do too much too soon. Now, one sentence really jumps out at me in that paragraph. Stress fractures usually affect the weight-bearing bones. And while that's true physically, I think it's also true emotionally and mentally. When we are carrying around great weights, great burdens, we have a tendency to crack. We can experience stress fractures in that way as well. Now, Jesus said something in Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30, and we're going to come back to it in this message and really throughout this series. He said these words, "Come unto me, all who are weary and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I think if Jesus were to say that today in our culture, he would say, "Come to me, all you who are tired and stressed out, and I will give you relief." Doesn't that sound good? Doesn't that sound like something just what the doctor ordered? So many of us live stressed out lives. We may not even be aware of it. But Jesus promises to give us rest. First, this morning, I'd like to ascertain the character of stress. What do we mean when we use that word? Very technically, in the language of physics, stress is a term used by engineers to describe both the external force applied to a material and the internal strength required to resist that pressure. Oftentimes when something is manufactured, they will give it a stress test, and they will apply pressure or put weight on it and see how much it can withstand until it cracks. That's a stress test. It speaks of the external force applied to it, but also the internal strength needed to withstand. That's what we're going to focus on. The internal strength needed to withstand the external pressures on our lives. So, specifically speaking, that's the kind of stress we're going to look at. Dr. Hans Selye was the father of stress research. He defined stress as the non-specific response of the body to any demand. He goes on to write in his book, The Stress of Life, "No one can live without experiencing some degree of stress. You may think that only a serious disease or intense physical or mental injury can cause stress. That's false. Crossing a busy intersection, exposure to a draft, even sheer joy is enough to activate the body's stress mechanism to some extent. Stress is not even necessarily bad for you. It's the spice of life. For any emotion, any activity causes stress." And he emphasizes in all of his books that the body responds the same way whether the stress is positive or negative. In fact, he coined a couple of words. One you've heard of, one you probably haven't. Eustress, which is spelled with a silent E at the beginning, EU stress, is good stress. This is positive stress. These are good things that happen in your life, like a wedding, or a new job, or moving into a new house. These are all good things, but they cause stress. On the other end, there's distress. You've probably heard that word. Distress are negative things in our lives, which can cause stress. His point is this: whether it's coming from a source of joy or a source of sorrow, a source of anxiety or a source of elation, it affects our body the same way. It's all stress, whether it comes from a good stress or a bad stress situation. What happens when we encounter stress is that the adrenal glands in our bodies pump adrenaline into our system. This makes the heart beat faster, blood pressure to rise, digestion to speed up. Muscles are put on full alert. Maybe you've heard the phrase fight or flight. That's what stress does. It gets us ready to move. Some of you fellows might be into cars, and especially race cars. You might know what nitrous oxide does to an engine, right? You put nitrous oxide in it, and bam, it's ready to go. It'll take off down the road. But I ask you, what happens if you put too much or for too long a time run that car on nitrous oxide? You're going to burn that engine up. It's not meant to always be running on that. It's for a quick boost, a quick surge. And that's what adrenaline is meant to be in our bodies. It's a quick surge to get us to act at a particular time. Now, Dr. Archibald Hart, he is a Christian physician who has devoted his entire practice to the study of stress and how it affects our body. He's written an excellent book. You'll hear me refer to this a lot as well. The Hidden Link Between Adrenaline and Stress. And in this, he writes, "Stress fires our boilers and motivates us to get projects completed or to overcome obstacles that block our achievements. At certain times and at certain levels, stress can enhance a person's concentration, strength, or productivity." You ever heard somebody say, "I work better under pressure"? That's what they're talking about. Because when you're stressed, you focus more. And you can achieve more in a shorter period of time. That's your body preparing you to do that. I remember when I was in college. Well, even before I was in college, I remember when I was in junior high school, I'd put everything off to the last minute. Homework assignment, I'm hurrying getting it done right before the bell rings. Paper due, wait till the last minute, right? So I go to college and I think, I'm going to change my ways. I've got a term paper due in 4 weeks. I'm going to write it now. So I got everything out, finished it, and in the next 4 weeks, I rewrote it 6 times. And the paper I turned in was the one I wrote the night before it was due. Said, I'm never doing that again, so I just kept putting it off the last minute. Now, that's how our body works. That's how God designed us, so that when we meet a situation, our body gets fired up and ready to hit it, ready to take care of it. That's not a bad thing. What's bad is the overuse of it, which we're going to get to in a moment. Now, usually when a person speaks of being stressed out, it's because of negative things that are going on in their lives. They've got work stress. There may be stress in their marriage, stress between parents and children, financial stress. Usually it's a negative connotation, but you can be stressed out in good things. Ask a bride a week before her wedding. I mean, she's looking forward to this. This is the greatest day of her life. But you've never seen stress until you've looked into the eyes of a bride the week before her wedding, or the night before the wedding, at the rehearsal. Trust me, I've dealt with a lot of that. Or the mother of the bride, that too. Now, these are good things, but they have the same effect on our bodies. They can stress us out, and the destructiveness is just as real. Secondly, I want to admit the calamity of stress. Again, referring to Dr. Hart's book, we are entering an extraordinarily new age in medicine and the health sciences. On the one hand, we are making remarkable progress in curing illnesses and prolonging life. On the other hand, we are losing the battle against a very simple but elusive problem, and that's stress. Despite medical science's enormous strides in treating illness, the problems caused by stress are becoming more prevalent and difficult to treat. The time is rapidly approaching, if we're not already there, when we will be dying less and less from infectious and invasive diseases, but more often from the ravaging effects of too much stress. And stress disease is different from most other illnesses. We bring it on ourselves. You say, is that accurate? Is that just an overstatement in order to sell more books? No, it's accurate. And the health departments of not only our country, but Canada, England, many of the Western European nations, they are all discovering how stress is really a subtle killer. And you think about what is the most prevalent cause of death in our culture? Heart disease. One of the biggest factors in heart disease. Not so much diet and exercise, although that can be an important factor, but oftentimes it's stress. We are literally killing ourselves by being too stressed out. When we are stressed over a period of time, and that's really where the problem comes in. When we live on adrenaline, when we just jump from one stressful situation to the next, and there's no break, there's no time off, there's no rest, what happens is we end up with high blood pressure, high cholesterol. I know they give you medications to treat cholesterol and tell you to watch your diet, and that's a good thing. Sometimes high cholesterol and high blood pressure can be hereditary, but oftentimes it's linked to stress. Too much stress reduces the body's immune system, weakens its ability to fight off disease. No one would quite say that stress will cause cancer, but they do believe that stress will feed cancer and make it grow quicker in some cases. In addition to this, it damages the normal functions of our body. One of the things that happens when we're under stress is our stomach wants to digest quicker so that we get energy to our muscles. And so it secretes more acid into our stomach to deal with whatever food is there. But when we are constantly stressed, we're constantly pumping acid into our stomach. And what happens? You end up with acid reflux. It can lead to ulcers because we're overusing the adrenal glands God gave us. There's even a more subtle way stress can affect us. It can rob us of our sleep. When we're very stressed out, it's very hard to shut off our minds and to shut off our emotions and be able to rest. And much of that is caused by stress. That can lead to an overdependence upon drugs or alcohol or tobacco, and those have damaging effects of their own. So you see how it can be a domino effect in our lives. It can affect so many things in our bodies. Hart concludes, is it any wonder more people are dying from stress's total influence today than from almost any other cause? Now, I'm not suggesting this is anything new. If you go in your Bible, you'll find the word distress in one form or another over 100 times. We've been dealing with stress since Adam and Eve. I mean, that is not something new. And the Hebrew word used in the Old Testament for stress is a word that literally means tight, something that's drawn taut. And isn't that a great way of thinking about stress? Everything's tight. Even your muscles tighten up when you get stressed. And if you tighten it and again, don't let it relax, that's when it causes trouble. There's an old Greek saying, you will break the bow if you keep it always bent. And that's true for our bodies as well. Think about a rubber band, okay? Rubber band you put between your forefinger and your thumb. When you're just relaxed, it keeps its shape. When you stretch it out, it'll expand. It's meant to do that. But then when you bring your fingers back together, it goes back to its normal condition. What happens, though, if you leave that rubber band stretched out for an extended period of time? It becomes brittle. It loses its elasticity. Eventually, hairline cracks will form, and it'll snap. How often do you hear about people who snap? Or they'll say, I'm about to snap. Usually they're under stress, aren't they? The same principle applies in our lives. Many so-called psychosomatic disorders can be related to this. I don't know about you, but when I first heard the term psychosomatic, I thought that was a sickness that's all in your head, right? It's not real, it's imagined, or it's one that you just think about it long enough and you can make yourself sick. That's not true. A psychosomatic disorder is one that starts in the psyche, in the soul, but it affects the body. And that's what stress does. It starts on the inside, but eventually works its way out. So again, the problem is a continuous elevated level of adrenaline pumping through our bodies as we constantly respond to the demands of our lives. I'm not suggesting we should live a stress-free life. Do you know what you call a stress-free life? Boring. I mean, there's nothing going on, right? So I'm not saying we should eliminate all stress. What I'm saying is we need to manage it better. And we need to give ourselves time to rest. Time for your mind, your body, your spirit to rest. When we constantly feed our bodies adrenaline and keep all of those systems pumping at full force, we're eventually going to wear out. God did not make us that way. I think Chuck Swindoll hit it right on the head when he says, whoever dubbed our times the aspirin age didn't miss it by very far. It's correct to assume there's never been a more stress-ridden society than ours. For many, gone are the days of enjoying bubbling brooks along winding pathways or taking a long stroll on the beach. A relaxed bike ride through a local park has been replaced by the roar of a motorcycle whipping through busy traffic. The easy-come, easy-go lifestyle of the farm has been preempted by the hectic urban family going in 6 different directions. and existing on instant dinners, shouting matches, strained relationships, too little sleep, and too much television. Add financial setbacks, failure at school, unanswered letters, obesity, loneliness, ringing telephones, unplanned pregnancies, fear of cancer, misunderstanding, materialism, alcohol, drugs, and an occasional death. Subtract from that the support of a family unit, divide by dozens of opinions, and multiply by 365 days a year, and you have the makings of madness. Stress has become a way of life. It is the rule rather than the exception. Folks, if stress is a way of life, if stress is the rule and not the exception, we are in trouble. And we are going to pay the price. Well, now that we have admitted the calamity of stress, let's acknowledge the causes of it. And there's countless things that can cause stress. I want to summarize them into basically three. Three causes of stress. First is our pace. At the very core of the stress problem is our lifestyle. For most of us, it's too hectic, it's too fast-paced. We're driven by the need to succeed, the need to prove ourselves, if to nobody else, to ourselves. We are driven, and it leads to a little room for relaxation or leisure. It's like we're trapped on a runaway train and we don't know where the brakes are. The engines of our bodies are jammed at full throttle and we're flying down the tracks with no hope in sight. Now, technology has allowed us to do things faster, but that hasn't helped with our stress, has it? When you can take something that took 3 hours and do it in a half an hour, instead of giving us 2.5 hours more time, we just jam that with trying to get more done, don't we? We raise our expectations, which causes more stress, and we drive ourselves harder. This hurried lifestyle creates a persistent internal state of emergency that keeps the adrenaline pumping. Another related cause for this problem is our personality, particularly one called a type A personality. Maybe you've heard of that. Type A personality. Always in a hurry. Always trying to achieve more and more. See if any of these character traits sound familiar. And I'm not saying the person next to you. No elbows, okay? They have a high degree of competitiveness. They're easily irritated by delays. They have a low tolerance for frustration. They're hard driving and ambitious. They're highly aggressive. They're easily angered and have a free-floating hostility, which means any little thing can set them off. They cannot relax without feeling guilty. Ouch. They're confident on the surface, but insecure within. They speak aggressively, accentuating key words, and they have a tendency to finish other people's sentences. Ugh. Those are some tough shoes to fit into, aren't they? And if you have that kind of a personality, you are going to be more prone to stress yourself out, to live on that adrenaline rush. Now, these aren't all bad traits. In fact, many successful leaders are type A personalities. I had the chance to share much of what I'm sharing with you today with our fire department. And just about to a man, as I'm reading through that list, they're all going like this. Yep. Sounds like me. It's not necessarily a bad thing. We've just got to be careful that we don't allow ourselves to drive more and more and more and more and more till we wear out. There's an old saying, it's better to wear out than rust out. I'm not so sure, because either way you're out. And I don't think God wants either one for our lives. Now, one final cause I want to introduce, but we're going to go into more detail as we get specific throughout the series is our perception. We tend to create stress in our minds over things that aren't even real. We worry about things that may not even happen. In a couple of weeks, we're going to tackle the problem of worry. You are going to be amazed to find out what percentage of things we worry about actually happen. It is amazingly low. But our bodies are designed that we respond to stress the same way, whether it's real or imagined. You can talk yourself into being stressed out over something that isn't even there. And we often do. Our expectations can drive us into stress. When we expect so much of ourselves and even so much of others that we get stressed out. So anything, even imaginary, can cause stress. We need to learn how to deal with that. I heard a saying many years ago, I think it was attributed to Corrie ten Boom. Worry does not relieve tomorrow of its stress. It merely empties today of its strength. Think about it. When you're worried about what's going to happen tomorrow or Tuesday or the next week, does it do any good? No, it hasn't changed a thing. But it keeps you from being able to deal with what you need to deal with today. I'm so worried about tomorrow that I forget about what's going on today. And what did Jesus say? Don't worry about tomorrow. Today's got enough problems of its own. Amen? So focusing on what's real as opposed to what might be could take care of a lot of our stress. Finally, I'd like to appreciate the cure of stress. And over the weeks to come, again, we're going to be very practical in how do we handle various kinds of stress in our lives. But I want to go back to that passage I opened with in Matthew 11. The words of Jesus, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you" what? Rest. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble at heart, and you will find" what? Rest for your souls. What is Jesus promising? He's promising us rest. To the worn out, to the stressed out soul. Often we associate rest with relaxation, and both of those are casualties to our 21st century lifestyle, doesn't it? We find little time for rest and relaxation. You know, God created us with that need. One of the 10 Commandments, the fourth one in particular, says, "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy." Now, people misunderstand that. They say keep it holy and says, oh, that means go to church. No, it doesn't. Had nothing to do with go to church. In that verse, when it says keep it holy, it means keep it separate. It means do something different on that day than you do the other 6. In fact, in that passage it says, 6 days you'll do your work, but on the 7th day you're to rest from your work. Do something different. If you have a job that's very physical and demanding through the week, you need to take a day. May not be the 7th day for you, but whatever day you work in your schedule, you need to take a day and give your body a break. Sleep in. Lay in a hammock. Whatever. Rest. Because it'll prepare you for the next week. Now, some of you may have a job where it's not that physically taxing. Maybe you sit behind a desk a lot. Maybe you're using your mind a lot. Give your mind a break. That might be a good day to go out and work in your garden, mow the grass, play around a golf. That sounds a whole lot better than doing yard work. Do something different. Give yourself a break. That's what the Sabbath is all about. I hear people say, well, the Sabbath isn't repeated in the New Testament. It doesn't have to be. The Old Testament is still God's Word. And the 10 Commandments are not 10 suggestions. They are still commands of God. What Jesus fought against was not the Sabbath, but all the rules added to the Sabbath. Let's make that very clear. And I'm not suggesting being legalistic about it, but I am saying take a break. And I'll confess, for years I was guilty of not doing that, especially when I was working another job in addition to preaching. I just went day after day after day after day, week after week after week, month after month, never took a break. And it cost me physically and mentally and spiritually. Now Monday is my Sabbath. That's my day off. And I need that. We all do. Bob read earlier from Hebrews chapter 4 about the Sabbath rest for God's people. Do you know why the Israelites did not enter God's Sabbath rest? It said it in that passage. Because of unbelief. Do you know why we tend to stress ourselves out? Do you know why we don't take a Sabbath? Unbelief. It's actually a lack of faith. Because we're so convinced that if I don't do it, nobody will. If I don't do it, it won't get done. You know what? Let it not get done. And you'll find out how unimportant it really was. Let somebody else do it. Let God do it. I know it's an old worn-out cliche. I don't use it a lot. But there are times when let go and let God really fits. And this may be one of them. We need to allow God to be God. Do you know what the penalty was for breaking the Sabbath in the Old Testament? Death. Think, wow, that's pretty severe. Some guy's out picking up sticks on the Sabbath day and they stone him to death. Really? Yeah. Now, we're not under that law today, but do you know what the penalty for not getting rest for our bodies is? Death. We may not get drug out and stoned to death, but it's going to kill us a lot sooner than it should because we're doing it to ourselves. That's how important this subject is. It's about our life, our health, taking care of the bodies God has given us so that we can do more for God, and sometimes that means doing less. I know that makes absolutely no sense, but think about it. By doing less, we can accomplish more. And that's the way God designed us. And some of the times it's just a matter of saying, okay, God, I've done all I can. I'm letting it go. And you will find rest for your souls. Now, I know today we only covered the basics. This is just a foundational message. After next week with Mother's Day, we're going to come back to this and we're going to get very specific. We're going to be talking about things like worry and fear, bitterness and anger, lots of different things that cause stress, and the way the Bible says we can deal with them in a healthy manner. But for today, I want you to remember the words of Jesus. Come unto me, and I will give you rest. Psalm 46:10 says, be still and know that I am God. Be still in Hebrew means cease and desist. Stop. Stop what you're doing and know that He is God. We need to remind ourselves that not taking a rest is really a sin because God said we should. And we need to incorporate that into our lives. So the next time you hear somebody say, the stress is killing me, admit they might be right. Stress is a subtle killer when it's not managed correctly. And over the following weeks, we're going to see how we can do that in very specific ways. But right now, find rest. We sang in our first hymn, Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. Perfect submission, all is at rest. When we know Jesus is on our side there's no need to worry. We can rest. Leaning on the everlasting arms, resting in Jesus. And our final hymn this morning, if you will turn to number 244, The Haven of Rest. Maybe you can identify with these words. My soul in sad exile was out on life's sea, so burdened with sin and distress, till I heard the sweet voice saying, make me your choice, and I entered the haven of rest. Maybe that's what you need this day. Maybe you say, I've never turned my life over to Jesus Christ. Without Christ, there is no rest. Life is just that wheel that the hamster runs on and never gets anywhere. Jesus says, I will give you rest. Allow him in. Find rest for your souls.